Welcome back to Buying Sandlot. On today's episode, we're talking to Ntangible CEO and founder Dan Connerty about one of the most important attributes in sports, and that's clutch. Few words in sports gets thrown around more than clutch. Coaches talk about it, scouts look for it, and parents swear their kid has it. But until now, it's been almost impossible to measure. Well, Dan thinks that's about to change. Ntangible is a sports technology company developing cognitive assessments designed to measure how athletes perform under pressure using cognitive science, psychology, and AI to help identify which athletes are most likely to rise to the occasion when the game is on the line. We dive into how Intangible's clutch factor assessment works, why Dan believes cognitive analytics is the next frontier, how youth sports coaches and operators are beginning to incorporate mental performance into recruiting and player development, and where cognitive analytics fits alongside technologies like TrackMan, Rapsodo, and GameChanger. But before we get into that, we want to thank Blackmagic Design for sponsoring the show. Recently, every kick, phase, scrum, and try at this year's Tropical Sevens Youth Rugby Tournament was streamed thanks to Blackmagic Design, and that includes 250 plus teams, 750 plus matches across 15 fields and 1.2 million square feet, over 4 days of frenetic action streamed live in its entirety at a level not previously seen in the sport. That included their A10 Mini Extreme and Mini Pro switchers and converters for multi-camera streaming and their DaVinci Resolve replay and post-production solutions. Everyone who watches youth sports, from athletes, parents, and grandparents to coaches and college recruiters, has come to expect streaming that looks and sounds professional. Blackmagic Design can deliver just that for your club, event, facility, or school. Their suite of affordable products are the same high quality as those used by professional sports teams and in Hollywood, delivering easy to learn multicam streaming that open new revenue streams. For more information, visit Blackmagic Design. And now, let's get into our interview. Today, we're joined by Dan Connerty, CEO and co-founder of Ntangible, one of the more interesting emerging sports technology companies in youth sports. Dan, can you give the audience who might not be familiar with the company just your elevator pitch of what you guys do?
Yeah, elevator pitch. We are the disc assessment for sports. Think of us in that sense, where we have now put a validated and predictive score to clutch performance, or the idea where players can rise to the occasion when the game's on the line versus those that fall consistently in high leverage stakes and moments. This is something that is a starting point on the cognitive analytics side, where if you aren't in on this space now, it will be the fastest growing market in terms of growth over the coming years. And from an identification standpoint, recruiting standpoint, player dev standpoint, albeit early, we are the first of its kind in terms of being able to give you a full scope understanding of what these skills are, and then the ability to test and retest over time and see what interventions may improve.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into all that, peel back all that stuff. So if I'm correct, and we have talked before, this is a 15-minute to 20-minute assessment. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we've broken it down into two products. The first is your clutch factor assessment, which singularly focuses on getting insights into players' mindsets within those moments. So just some general background. This was developed by myself and Dr. Ed Levine. Dr. Ed Levine is known as the godfather of industrial psychology. We were connected through a friend of a friend in my player dev days, and we just started talking. And I told him back at that time, I believe we're going to cap out what we can measure physically. And our first conversation, was in 2019, so I'm dating myself a bit, but we're now fighting for 99.6% sleep score versus 98% to determine if we had a good sleep, right? That's the world we live in today.
That's my Aura Ring, baby.
There you go. And so I told him at the time that cognitive data has been this black box that nobody's really wanted to touch, or we've given a carte blanche to in terms of outcome success outside of qualitative statistics, like, how are they playing? How are your players feeling today? Oh, they feel more confident at the plate. Oh, so therefore the sports psychologist that was working with it, they must be working, right? There was no actual definitive measurement to state this is actually working and improving these skills, because we haven't had ways to measure it. And when I told Ed the Wonderlic was being used, he just laughed at me. And he said, Dan, the Wonderlic was developed in the 1920s to select executive assistants for Wall Street. I go, you're telling me that's what the NFL is using to select quarterbacks right now? And I said, well, some of them do, so they swear by it, and others are like, no, it's trash. So the clutch factor assessment is based on the thematic apperception test, where you're given pictures with no definitive outcomes and there's no right or wrong answers. And we ask players to put themselves in the situation as athletes within it, sometimes positional specific. And we say, who are you in the situation? What's happening? What are you thinking and feeling? And what's going to happen next? And that type of response, all open ended, run against our semantic neurolinguistic scoring guide, shoots out your clutch factor score. So that's the first assessment, takes around 15 minutes in the background. The second is something called Interpret, which is effectively a personality driven profiling test, which takes 5 minutes. It's 10 open ended questions. And the ultimate goal of that is to provide more supplementary information outside of the clutch specific skills that we get in the other assessments. So I can identify within those 10 questions your learning style, your communication style, and your motivational anchors of an athlete. And then we can also prescribe underlying growth areas of improvement holistically, as well as prescribe pre, post, and practice drills personalized to these athletes across the board.
And then it shows the athlete a score out of 1,000 after the test. What does one score tell you versus another versus another? And then what are some examples that you've seen where Intangible offers to you to improve it down the line?
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of any emerging analytic is when you're able to come up with something where you get a finite value. That first initial phase is, what the hell does this actually mean with anything? And so when we first started administering this test with early partners, that was the same deal, where coaches would come back to us and say, hey, this is cool and all, but what does this score actually mean? And I can tell you now, after we're just shy of 7,000 assessments in the door across 9 different sports, we've seen some really strong data specific correlations towards general stats like lower ERAs, batting average, OPS, batting average with runners in scoring position, more sport specific high leverage correlations, such as how well people perform against leverage index in baseball and softball, and bases out leverage index in baseball and softball. And we've also started to see some very strong college commitment correlations to these scores. So at a very high level, I can tell you as a high school athlete across 9 sports so far, if you score above a 750 on this assessment and you're which we consider an elite range, you're 2 times more likely to commit to a D1 program. If you're a collegiate athlete and you're above an 800 on this assessment, 73% of all those kids, does not matter your sport, are all American or all conference selections. And again, that's totally outside of the sport specific correlations we're seeing. But what we wanted to do was build out a support system associated to it. So we've got a team of military and sports psychologists on our staff. Dr. Jacob Hyde is our military psych. He was part of the last round of Navy SEALs assessment protocol psychologist. He was part of that group that helped build that. And then Howie Schwartz is our sports psych. He was the former sports psychologist for the Montreal Expos, and his claim to fame is he's worked with tons of Olympic athletes all across the globe. But what we did was we took their knowledge base and put it into our model, and based off of all the open-ended responses, I can tell you, and the model will shoot out specific sports psychology drills that it believes will help you within those clutch moments. So it takes our data point from something that is tangible, pardon the pun, to something that you can put towards action should you so choose. Now, is this product something where we want to be checking up on these athletes to make sure they're doing it all the time? I don't know if I want to play babysitter or even coach. I think that's what coaches are supposed to do, but it's guiding people in the right direction to make their life easier should they choose to do so.
And then what do some of those drills look like that you can help you improve on?
Think of your normal standard 20 to 25 sports psych drills base that is currently out there in the market. Everyone has their own way of saying it or their own way of describing their system and process, but it really is the core, visualization, breathing, scripting, journaling. Like, these are all things that have been standardized across the board throughout years of practice. And by no means are we giving you a white glove, do our training program and you're going to improve your skills over 8 weeks and your score will improve by 20%. We're not there yet, and nor do I wonder if we want to go that route. But in terms of next steps, or terms of next steps in the development for these players, I think that's where practitioners are going to come into play and really take this data into their own and build upon it themselves to see where they can take it and grow from there.
And then mental skills develop over time, correct?
Yes, this is not a stagnated score. So that's the beauty of your clutch factor, is this is not a one and done test. This is something we administer annually, and sometimes a preseason or postseason, or every 6 months, with the idea that if you take and again, I'll use my player dev background. You take your intake, you get a baseline, you figure out what interventions you want to add in, you retest to see if what you did improved it, whatever that baseline was, or other metrics, and then you continue to iterate from there. And I think that's really where we're starting to see this. I'll use some examples with some of our pro partners and their mental performance staff. They use this. One MLS team we're working with, I can vividly tell you, she says our assessments take her from meeting 4 to meeting 1 right away. So what that means is it would take 4 one-on-one meetings for her to get all the knowledge and information regarding an intervention plan for her with that athlete, where she can go right away without ever talking to them and have an idea of what she needs to do in terms of what that intervention plan may look like. So that's one way in which we're starting to see the data implemented. I think the other way, outside of a drill focused aspect, is a support focused aspect. So with the personality driven assessment interpret and all the other cognitive data we get on the clutch factor test, I can provide a support agent to coaches, which can tell them how to communicate better with their athletes on all these soft skills that they just didn't have prior. Because at the end of the day, a lot of things get lost in translation. And if I, as a coach, I can, when I was playing, if coach came to me and said, "Hey, Dan, how you feeling today?" I could feel like absolute garbage, and I'd be telling him, "I feel 100%. I'm awesome. I'm ready to go. I want the ball." Right? This kind of breaks through this barrier a little bit further, in the sense of, you might not be communicating the right way with your athletes, and what you're saying is not getting through to them as much. But having all this cognitive data and context provides us an opportunity to help bridge that gap a little bit further and get rid of this feeling out process, which we hear all the time from colleges. Yeah, I don't really know my guys until they're here in fall season, or I don't know them until they step foot on campus. Well, the beauty of this assessment is, for these players that you might not know much information about, or the players that are returning back to your program, you can step right forward, or you can step forward right away with all this information and context right from the get-go, without having that process or feeling out process, where you can really build upon a positive improvement, rather than stagnating and kind of staying in this middle level lull, which we see a lot of teams and coaches do.
And that's obviously, you package that in with, high school, in terms of like when they're recruiting them to, okay, now they're in college. Okay, now we need them in the ninth inning. Here's my maybe 3 guys on the bench that I would trust the most, or here's my guy in the ninth spot. I'm going to put him in here to start, so that, if it does get around to him, at least I can trust him. Is that kind of how you're packaging it a little bit when you're talking to these coaches?
And again, I'm going to preface, coaches know their rosters better than we will ever will. And I also don't want to tell coaches how to coach. You've been successful, you've gotten to this point. This is an assistant to help you make more informed decisions about what we call your gut feel. A lot of times coaches, they'll make decisions on the fly about players, or put them in positions because of all these soft driven qualitative aspects. We hear it all the time. They're a gamer, they're a bulldog, they'll run through a wall for me, they've bought into my system. All these things are fine, but this score actually references that and puts it to that point where you can say, hey, if I'm looking to select a closer, for example, and I test all my relievers, I probably want the one who's most clutch, because the higher you score on this assessment, the more likely you are to perform in those high leverage moments. And it might shock you that they might not be the most skilled athlete all the time. One example I can give is we worked with the University of Indianapolis's baseball team, D2 program, made the College World Series a few times, and they had us test their roster and all their relievers. And the highest scoring player was a guy by the name of E.J. White. Now, you may have never heard of E.J. White, but E.J. White in his final season led or was third in all of the NCAA in saves across all levels. He basically single-handedly led them to the College World Series and was successful there. Now, E.J. White was a D3 walk-on, a bit overweight, and threw 78 to 81 miles an hour from a funny arm angle. He wasn't getting any scholarship money or looks from some big programs. But when we backtracked and figured out what his background was, his dad was best friends with Dan Marino when he worked at the NFL. So he had guys like that all around his house all the time. And so mentally he was there. And the coach, when he, Coach Reddy, Al Reddy, when he first asked, was like, "Are you sure this is the guy?" And we said, we believe that you should give him a shot and see if he's able to make it work. And came in, took the ball, never left. And this was a guy that was overlooked by all these other rosters and all these other teams based off of all these other parameters. But this was something that made him stand out. And so I think that's where you're going to see a lot of usage here. In basketball, it's been a lot of who gets the final shot or who gets put into for a defensive stop. In soccer, it's who are my guys for penalty kicks or corner kicks. You know, those are the things where this will help you make that decision, but by no means is this the sole deciding factor.
Yeah, thank you for that example. That example was great. You said the cognitive is the next frontier of testing. You mentioned earlier. Take it back to like the youth area, the high school space. How do you get that original buy-in from coaches and parents to not only trust the technology, but add another metric to the dozen or so that they're already juggling? What's working for you guys right now?
The buy-in comes from the understanding of identification. At the end of the day, this company, Ntangible, our assessments, I'd hate for us to be a dream killer where someone goes in, they take a test, they score poorly, and they're like, "This is it, I'm done." That is not a goal of ours. Our goal is you don't know what you don't know, parents don't know what they don't know, and coaches don't know what they don't know. And for years, we've only had qualitative archetypal data when it comes to cognitive performance. Now you have a score. And with this score, even if you score poorly, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad player. It just means that your physical skills far outweigh your mental. And once you have that information, what can you do to improve upon it? And does that give you an understanding and circumstance to take the initiative to go work with somebody to improve those skills, or take some of the drills that we suggest to heart and implement them? So I think at the youth level, that's the buy-in. But from organizations, a lot of showcase organizations, tournament companies, this is something where it's a low load integration, usually aligned with league fees, where, you know, it doesn't cost an arm and a leg to take this test. You know, this isn't something where you're dropping a couple $100 up front where to complete this. This is something that's quite manageable and cost effective. But having this data and being able to have this data as part of your process moving forward, we find a lot of the time, you know, our retention rate is very high. You know, once you have this data, it's very hard to go back. I use the example of Rapsodo. Once you have Rapsodo, it's very hard to go back to just the radar gun when you're throwing bullpens.
Because since you brought it up, I definitely want to ask, you know, what's the business model behind it? What's the price point look like? Is it subscription? Is this a one-time fee? I'm sure there's different tiers to it and everything. Anything you can provide on the business model side, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, usually, so main model is B2B and B2B2C at the moment. At a wholesale market price at the youth level, we usually charge $29 per athlete. There could be a rev share partner or part of it, depending on what that integration may look like and scaling. You know, if we're talking hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of athletes, there may be an opportunity to drop that price a little bit, just depending. But on a collegiate or pro level, we're looking at an annual SaaS subscription, and that either goes per team or that goes from athletic department to NIL collective, depending across the board. But included in that subscription, you have full unlimited access to recruit testing. So we've actually seen a fair amount of colleges use this. Their roster might use this for testing, but on the recruiting side, I tell most coaches, anybody with a pulse you have interest with, there's no harm in having them take this test. So a lot of times this seems to get integrated into college camps that they're holding on campus, to make them stand out a little bit further from their peers, that to say they value mental just as much as they value physical. And it's usually a nice value add to give a report back to an athlete that attends their camp, so that then when they retest a year later, there's a bit more understanding of where they are and where they compare.
What's the integration? What's the interoperability look like kind of with this? Like if like we had Santiago from Curve Sports, he's building a bunch of super clubs around the country and everything. Can this integrate into a Futures app or a Curve testing center or a TrackMan? Like what's the integration look like if you're a youth sports operator and you're like, I have all this, data on the physical side. I love Intangible. I love what I'm hearing here. How do I just hook that on right now with everything?
It's pretty simple. We're fully API native. So the idea here is, if you are looking to integrate these scores and tests into your system, it's a matter of how much you want to take from the data we're able to provide. I mean, we can host everything on our back end, but we've got some pro teams that all they care about is a clutch factor score. We've got some other organizations where when they pull our data, they want everything because they've got multiple different departments looking at the data. It might be the mental performance department that uses it more heavily than the scouting department, but the scouting department still has our scores as part of their internal algorithms for drafting, right? Like those are the kinds of examples. At a youth level, like a Curve, again, depends on how you want the reporting to be shown. But the beauty of our test is, because it's annual and it's not a one and done, this is something where once it's baked into the system or the model, you can bake it in or base it around usually annual fees. When fees are due, we can set up a webhook where once fees are paid, trigger gets sent, test gets sent to you digitally. You can take it on your phone, tablet, computer. You don't have to be proctored when taking this test. And because of that flexibility, gathering this data becomes a lot easier and a lot more feasible in a quick time manner. So it's totally possible. It's just a matter, I guess the answer is, every organization's a little bit different, but we do have flexibility on our technical back end to make it work.
Nice, nice. I know you have a partnership with the Lions Fast Pitch 2, opens you up to 20,000 plus girls softball players from 13 on up. What's the strategy around scaling? How do you look at it from a media perspective? How do you look at it from, maybe an on-location perspective or a digital perspective? Like, how are you planning to get more assessments in hands of orgs and players?
Well, there's two ideas behind it. One is finding more organizations like the alliances of the world, because they exist in every single sport. We do have 9 sports right now, all the major revenue earning sports. But you got to keep in mind, I'm a baseball guy through and through. That's my background, and almost everything we've built with our business has purely been from cold outreach. And so, finding connections and getting in front of the right people is, once we're there, it doesn't take long for us to close that integration and figure out what that setup may look like. The other thing is, from a growth side, is where do we want to go from a support system build out? We have an app coming soon for Alliance players, which is a starting point for a on-hand digital agent, which effectively acts as your sports psychologist in your pocket. But I don't like using that, nor I don't want to make any of the sports psychs mad, but what it does is it effectively provides personalized responses and opportunities and suggestions towards these athletes based off of all the cognitive data in real time, where they can get targeted feedback for a positive development or improvement on that development. And while in its initial phases, I think building out what that support system looks like, I use the example, an integration with GameChanger, for example. If you had the Intangible app that had all the information about you cognitively and our support agent, and GameChanger data was linked in real time after games, our agent could nudge you and say, hey, saw you went 1 for 4 today at the plate. Let's talk about it. And just by opening up and having that positive conversation with someone that knows how you should be talked to and will help you in that aspect, I believe, similar to therapy, just by opening up about your situations in more of a close-knit manner, you're probably going to get some positive feedback from that, rather than going into something that is more standardized from a development aspect.
And as people grow up and start, being comfortable with talking more with ChatGPT or Claude and everything, having conversations about trying to figure things out and everything, I feel like that's a really solid integration.
Not even growing up. A recent study just came out that said therapists, people are more likely, I think it was like 40% more likely to open up to digital therapists than human therapists, purely because they felt like human therapists were judging them. So
Interesting.
there's also that aspect as well, because of the stigmas associated and have been in the past, where something like this, even if it's not so much on the clinical side, but on the support side, you have the ability to create a more positive benefit at a click of a button.
You brought up GameChanger. We did talk to Rob Ponder from Perfect Game a couple last week, I believe, and he talked about integrating into the broadcast injury prevention things. So like if your arm slot's a little different from the 50th pitch to the 70th pitch, all that stuff. They're pretty innovative with their broadcast and everything. Do you see this hooking on into a broadcast in any way? I know that might be down the line, but what are your thoughts on that?
I would love to. You're fighting the unions at that point to get buy-in. The one thing I could see this business, and again, this is three years down the line, give or take, is we probably follow a synergy style model where right now our main selling point is competitive advantage. I have this and you don't, and fear of missing out for colleges, organizations. If you want to be cutting edge on the mental side, you're working with Ntangible, and otherwise you're going to be behind the eight ball. But if we've got mass usage across multiple different sports, then what? Because Synergy had the same issue, right? They started as this close-knit service for baseball, where they went in and it was a support system for that team to make their life easier. And then when everybody in college baseball was using Synergy, they switched to an open source model where, hey, if you're using it for our team, open it up to everybody else, but you get to scout your opponents as well. And once they went open source on that model, then it became a subscription fee where everyone has access to it. It's all open source. Then you can go from there. If Intangible reaches that point, I could see that being something in the future where if everyone has access to it, then why wouldn't broadcasts want to leverage this data? Why wouldn't sports books want to leverage this data? I could totally see a DraftKings, hey, LeBron James is, high clutch player. We kind of know, to an extent, but imagine our scores reference that as well. Well, it's the intangible, clutch factor rating, fourth quarter time within the last 5 minutes. Your bonuses goes up by 2x. Throwing that as an example, and that only works if everybody has access to this data, or it's open source at that point to that mass scale. But down the line, I could see that as a potential opportunity.
I know a customer base there would be a lot of college fans, a lot of people in the
Sure.
student section. They would love to have an open to see who's mentally weak, so they could chirp them, during a big comeback game winning drive or something like that. So that might be a customer base down the line. But I like where your head's at on that.
Yeah, probably better than searching for ex-girlfriends or anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I'll leave you with this. App is coming live in a couple of weeks. How big's the team? What does the raise situation look like? Are you bootstrapping it right now, or did you already raise? Is there raises coming down the line? Tell anybody. I mean, obviously, we have a lot of investors and stuff in our audience. So I always like to give people a chance to talk about that.
The beauty of this project and this company is the product is built and development costs for everything have just drastically gone down until Anthropic and GPT fight till the end, right? And so for us, I don't foresee this company having 20 full-time staff. Really almost all of our marketing is going to go, or all of our funds and raised funds, if we go that route, is going to go towards marketing at the end of the day, and getting ourselves out there to all these events and creating these relationships for these opportunities. The analogy I throw out, and I just had a call with a firm last week about it, was if Tom Brady was the face of the clutch assessment, or Michael Jordan was the face of the clutch assessment, would every athlete in America probably take this test, and their parent? The answer is, if the marketing was there, it could, right? And so I think for us, finding athlete or even coach endorsements is probably where most of our money is going to go, just to get that exposure out there. But from a raise standpoint right now, we are doing a small round of $1 million. I've bootstrapped this thing for the most part. We've taken on a couple of checks from angel investors. As much as they're more sports fans, I think they're more fans of Dan and co than anybody else. And so from that, a lot of that money will just go towards marketing initiatives, finding the right opportunities, probably at the low scale high school NIL market with social media followings, to see if we can start bootstrapping and building up on that front. But again, if we're talking about what's a Series A or a Series B looking like in the future, we're probably like AG1, where AG1 raised what, a Series D of $80 million and 70 million went to podcasts, podcast marketing, because literally any podcast you hear in the world, it's an AG1 ad, but it's worked, right? So
that's awesome. And you have a soccer recruiting product coming up, launching in December. Anything you could tell us more about that?
I will just say we're working with, it will be with one of the largest HRV, physical data GPS companies in the world. And we are also, it's going to be involved with a advanced analytic company in soccer, where you take your box score, runs through your video, and shoots out around 200 advanced analytics. My takeaway for you is this is launching in December, but if I was Huddle or Y Scout, I'd be a little bit worried. And it's going to be quite a game changer in the North American market. And if that's where, outside of buying Sandlot, you start to see Ntangible across your marketing pages, then so be it. But it is coming, and soccer is probably going to be our fastest growing sport coming into 27.
All right. Little tease for everybody. I enjoyed that. I like that as a podcast host and everything. And I think that just got you scheduled for an interview in December. So we look forward to talking
there you
to you
go.
there.
Awesome.
You're a great marketer, Dan. So I appreciate you coming on, man. And good luck with Ntangible. I know a lot of people argue, can you measure clutch? Can you not measure clutch? Well, I guess you'll be the shining example of that going forward, that you can measure clutch and everything. So we look forward to seeing how this all progresses.
No, I appreciate it. And that's the beauty of a product and what we're trying to do. One of our taglines is measure the unmeasurable. And, that's a lofty goal as a whole. And trust me, I live in a stats world. I get it. And a lot of times, if you didn't develop it yourself, you're always going to question it. But one thing we're seeing is, once it's out there in the market and the usage is there, as long as you get the valued success stories that come from it, there's value across the board. And, like I said, cognitive analytics is going to be the fastest growing market in the next 5 years across the board. And if you're not in on it now, you're going to be left in the dust in 12 to 18 months.
I love it. Well, good luck with everything.
Okay, appreciate it.